Well, I would like to think it would, but I'm rather pessimistic on this front. The relationships between Europe and the Mediterranean are governed by a series of Mediterranean trade agreements, which of course have also political and cultural and financial assistance dimensions. But specifically with respect to agricultural trade, it does allow for some free import of agricultural exports from the North African countries into Europe. But unfortunately, there are also some competitive issues where producers in Southern Europe feel that they are under competitive pressure from producers in North Africa. So there are also trade restrictions. And it would be great to see an initiative in the light of the Arab Spring where Europe was prepared to lower or obviously desirably to remove these trade restrictions. But in the most recent communication from the Commission on this subject, agriculture was not mentioned at all. Agricultural trade, the possibility of using further trade liberalisation to provide support to what's happening in North Africa. So that's disappointing, but hopefully maybe some rethinking of this can be brought about in the coming months. Well, I think it's important to recognize the progress that has been made here. And I would distinguish between three groupings of countries in Africa with respect to agricultural trade relations with Europe. We have South Africa, which is an important player in its own right. We have North Africa, which, as I say, is linked through a series of Mediterranean trade agreements. And then we have Sub-Saharan Africa, the great number of countries in between. And if we look at particularly Europe's trade relations with that third group, the Sub-Saharan African group, here we now have virtually totally barrier-free access in terms of tariffs and any trade barriers for agricultural exports from these countries, in part through the European Union's Everything But Arms initiative, which is focused on the least developed countries and which provides duty-free and quota-free access for all products, but also including agricultural products. But for the non-least developed countries, so countries like Ghana, like Kenya, and so on, these countries now have duty-free and quota-free access under the so-called interim economic partnership agreements. Now, these remain to be fully ratified, and there's controversy about some of the aspects of these agreements. But as of today, these countries, that is to say all of Sub-Saharan Africa, has duty-free and quota-free access to the European market, and as a result actually benefits to some extent from the protection in that market against third countries. For example, with respect to banana exports, say, from Central America, which is an important issue for some of the West African countries. And then, as I say, for North Africa, you still have some barriers, particularly with fruit and vegetable exports, and so those are still important. So these changes have taken place over the last decade. Everything But Arms was introduced in 2001. The interim economic partnership agreements in 2009. So my feeling is that what's now needed is a supply response. The market access is there, but unless we see the investment by African countries in the infrastructure, in the productivity improvement, and so on, to help generate agricultural growth, then those opportunities simply won't be used. And if one looks at trade statistics, it's rather remarkable that the countries that have had the most favorable access for a longer period of time actually are the countries where their market share has been falling. So it does seem that many of the issues are on the supply side rather than in terms of traditional trade barriers, which were a problem in the past, but which Europe has addressed, at least with respect to this large group of sub-Saharan African countries. Well, we do need in Europe to continue to provide support to the African Agricultural Development Strategy, which has been formulated by the African countries themselves, the so-called Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Programme. And financial resources from Europe will continue to be very important. What I have learned is the significance of countries like Brazil in terms of the technology transfer which is necessary to get some further dynamism in African agriculture. Because to some extent, the technical challenges which Africa faces are more similar to those that Brazil has faced and is facing than clearly the challenges that Europe is facing. So there are growing links between Brazilian agricultural researchers and those in Africa. And I think that this could be a tremendously positive sign for the future and something which clearly should be encouraged to grow.